right, welcome to another episode of not only the Poetry of Predicament podcast, but also the side project that was recently birthed, which is called Take My Hand, Conscious Parenting in Times of Collapse and Predicament. And I'm very excited to be speaking with the spouse of an earlier person in this series, an earlier interview, spoken with Susan McMillan, who has been a part of a number of different of the offerings here in the Safe Circle and Living Resilience world, and here on the podcast as well. And today her spouse, Matt McMillan, is going to be speaking with us. And you may have also watched a recent episode of this interview series with Kaeli, Matt and Susan's daughter, and her friend Dylan, both young people here in Costa Rica where they live. That was yet another interview in this family and this neighborhood. And so quite a lot of family participation here, a little node of interest and remarkable awareness, remarkable level of awareness of each member of the family that we've had a chance to speak with. So Matt, I'm so pleased that you could join us. I've had precious few fathers in the series. So for that reason alone, I'm very happy that you're here. But I'm also wondering if you could introduce yourself a little bit, again, where you are and what got you there, and also how this whole notion of the various large scale stressors that we have going on globally, obviously climate change being the most visible of them, but we've got a number of things going on the planet that are pretty large scale concerns. And obviously, as we've heard from other members of your family, you've got a lot of collective awareness going on. And I'm just curious how it shows up for you. How do these larger scale challenges and problems and predicaments show up for you? And well, let's just start there. If you would just introduce yourself a little bit and speak to kind of where you stand with all these large scale predicaments going on.
Well, I was born and raised in South Florida, so and I love Florida. Florida is a beautiful, beautiful state. I grew up. I've never lived more than 10 miles from the beach my entire life. I grew up in Jupiter, Florida, and I've lived all over South Florida, both sides. My current residence is near Tampa, and I had the luxury of parents who stayed together and were very stable, and I had a very, very leave it to beaver childhood. Knew from the time I was very young that I wanted to be a lawyer. And so I pursued that path. And so I wound up graduating law school, meeting Susan, and I had a very definite life path chosen, what I wanted it to look like. And always considered myself somewhat of an environmentalist, whatever that meant. We didn't talk about that growing up. It wasn't on anybody's radar growing up. So I recycled, saved water where I could, took short showers, hadn't given it that much thought until Susan, and this is 25 years ago, started talking about climate change. And I wouldn't say I was skeptical, I just never heard of it before and couldn't really fathom much what she was talking about. And she's been ahead of the curve the whole time. Always been way out ahead of most people in the science. And so she got to talking about it all the time, and I became much, much more aware. And we knew there was upcoming climate problems in the future, in the distant future, and the scientists would talk about by year 2110 there's going to be some sea level rise or whatever, and it was just everything was so far off in the future that it didn't seem that there was any urgency to it, and it seemed like there was time, and that we would fix this problem. And in the last couple years, I have sensed this growing urgency. I've seen the collapse starting to happen that everybody else just seems totally unaware of. And I guess Susan and I built a home way out in the country. And what we liked about it was because there's woods all around us. We have a 3-acre lot. It's all heavily wooded. Most of the homes around us are heavily wooded. State park at the end of our street. So it seemed ideal to raise a family. But what we noticed in the last couple of years is they're just cutting down every tree they can see in sight to build these ugly little communities with houses right next to each other, and cut down all the trees and build these little box houses and plant a small oak tree in everybody's front yard. And it was just very disheartening to watch a forest that's been there for 1,000 years get wiped out in a week. And then when Donald Trump was elected, and that was the last straw, we realized shortly after he took office what he was going to do. So Susan and I had been coming to Costa Rica for several years. And so we just decided that our daughter deserved the chance to grow up experiencing nature, experiencing a different lifestyle, a different culture where not everything is about how much money you can make and greed and profit. And so we moved her down here this year. Unfortunately, my 2 older sons are still in the States. They didn't have this opportunity. And so it's, I feel good as a parent that I'm able to do this for my daughter. And at the same time, I feel very, very sad as a parent that I have children at all at this point, knowing that they're not going to live out a natural life. They can't plan for the future like I've been able to. And even my future that I had planned out doesn't look like it's going to pan out that way. So, trying to keep the stiff upper lip, and for my daughter's sake, and just do everything I can do as a parent to make life meaningful and valuable for her, and do what I can to, as best I can, to help stem the tide of climate change and system collapse and environmental collapse as I can. So that's where I'm at with it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for laying that out so clearly. I appreciate having some context, where you've lived and what you've seen, especially the changes you've seen. And in terms of parenting, one of the early questions that I often ask in this in this kind of interview is, what were some of the assumptions that you grew up with in your family, in your neighborhood, in your schooling, and whatever the influences were? What was it going to mean to be an adult when you grew up? And what was it going to mean to be a parent? What did it seem like was the kind of the built-in story about what it was to become a parent that you grew up with? And then I'm wondering if you would just compare that to what you're seeing now.
I grew up, my father was a Baptist minister, And I grew up with the, if you work hard, you'll be successful. Get on a career path, keep your nose to the grindstone, and then someday you get to retire and take it easy. And I trusted the government. I was very, very naive. Trusted that the Environmental Protection Agency was just that. The Food and Drug Administration was to protect us. And I mean, I just persisted until I was in my mid to late 30s that the government served us, and they, I knew there was some government corruption, but the agencies that were designed to protect us, that's exactly what they were doing. And through some environmental work I did with pesticide spraying, I realized that the EPA and the FDA, which I met with, they would fly down to meet with me, and they would just lie straight faced. And when you would show them their own documentation that they were lying, I would say, well, this contradicts what you just said. What do you say to that? And they wouldn't even respond. They would just look at you with a blank stare. And so my naivety prevented me from seeing the world how it really was. I had this rose-colored glasses about how the world was, and it was all going to turn out all right. And when I became a father, I could assure my children the same message as I got. The government's good, you work hard, do a job, you'll be successful, and someday you get to retire and have a good life. And none of that is necessarily true.
Right.
So I feel lost as a parent about what to say to my children sometimes.
Yeah.
I have a son who is just about to finish law school. He's got the makings of a stellar career.
Mm-hmm.
He's a way smarter lawyer than I ever was, and he's been offered a job in New York, working at a silk tie law firm, making a lot of money. And there's this part of me that I can't dash his dreams, but at the same time, I want to say, all that money you're going to make, it's not going to help you when the world collapses. The money won't be worth anything. And then I have an autistic son who right now can avail himself of some social services and the welfare net, as it is, so that he won't starve and he'll have a roof over his head. And what happens to him, because he's very ill-equipped to handle the world now the way it is? What's going to happen when things fall apart? And so that weighs pretty heavily on my mind. And so the whole notion of parenting that I had when I first had children is I'm lost about where to go from here.
Yeah.
And so I feel like my job at this point is to just give them I know they're looking at me to see if everything's okay, if it's secure, it's safe, it's a sense of security. And so I have to pretend that it is at some level. They're going to be all right. We're all going to be okay. It's going to be ugly at times. Things are going to change, but we're going to be okay. And I don't believe that really. But I have to put on that face for my children.
Yeah. Well, Matt, I so appreciate your authentic, just your straight, clear sharing here. It takes courage. I mean, just to have this conversation in the first place takes courage. And then to be willing to let us in on what some of the inner landscape is like for you. I thank you very much for that, because what I can tell you is you're not alone. You're not alone in that sense of being lost, feeling lost from time to time. feeling. Another way of saying that I've heard people say is that the fabric of our world that we all grew up thinking was always going to be there and would be just a bit stronger and a bit brighter a fabric as the next generation stepped in. And to see that falling apart, that unraveling of that fabric, it can be, it sounds like that you well know, it can be deeply disorienting. There can be some pretty unpleasant emotions there, like, despair or at least confusion. I'm curious, is there anything more you can tell us about what some of these layers are of both the feeling and the thoughts that you go through as you watch these things change?
One of the things that's been hardest for me is that I grew up in a church where my father preached. He didn't try to scare people into heaven. He tried to love them into heaven. A different style of preaching. It's not you're all going to hell. It's Jesus has a message for you, and he can give you peace and love, and he by example taught us how to live our life, giving and taking care of the poor and giving refuge to the homeless, and never heard him talk about race, sex, homosexuality, abortion. He never broached those subjects. Those were people that you love. And if you hope to have any influence with people, you can't tell them they're going to hell. You have to tell them you love them. And then you can influence them. You have to, be relatable at some level. And I watched him go from church to church over the years when we were growing up and build a small church into a large church. And so growing up in the church was important to me. I don't consider myself a terribly religious person. Mm-hmm. But there was some comfort in the collegiality of having all these people around me that were like-minded. And one of the hardest things for me has been to grow up and see the religious right completely pervert Christianity into some vehicle for hatred and exclusion, closing borders, caging, raping the environment, and just the level of meanness and hatred that I've seen has been very unsettling. And so I've gone from a person who really, I don't want to say despise is a tough word, but I really don't want to surround myself or have anything much to do with anything involving Christianity, which was so important in my life growing up. So that's been a little, I'm searching for the word, but it's, unsettling. That's too soft a word, but unsettling and passive.
Well, sure. It sounds like that was such an important foundation piece in
exactly.
Your father being a pastor. It doesn't get much closer to home than that. And exactly. I can hear that now how it's evolved, if you will. You can't hold it as close as you once did, and I can only imagine how unsettling that is.
And not just hold it close; it's repulsive. What I see going on. And it's very sad. And I had hoped to raise my children in the church. And I did initially take my children to church, but I even back 20 years ago, I found it a little unsettling, the direction everything was going. And it's, 100 times worse today.
Yeah.
So it's a bitter pill to swallow in that respect, and it's a bitter pill to swallow with respect to whatever legacy. I've always been a goal-oriented individual, and what legacy will I leave behind to society and to my children? And I find myself going, well, there is no legacy. There will be no legacy. My I wanted to write a book. Well, to me, is why put the effort into writing a book at this point in my life. I'm 59 almost, and who will read it 20 years from now if we're still here? You know?
Right.
So it changes the way I've looked at my retirement, my legacy. You know, do I spend all my money now and just enjoy my life as best I can, or do I try to save some for my children? So it's a little, I'm not sure which direction to go with that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you brought up those examples. I would just add to it real quickly what you brought up before about your sons being in career tracks that often involve college, you know, and a lot of high-priced college.
Mm-hmm.
And what I can say is that there are, in many of the conversations that I'm in, there parents are asking the same kinds of questions that you're asking, and they're wondering, so what's the orientation for my children? You know, is this the time for them to be taking on $100,000 of debt and school, or is there a different track that's more appropriate to who they are given the times that we're in? So I'm hearing an awful lot of those same issues in what you're sharing. So let me just stop there and just see is there anything more that you're inclined to say about any of that, particularly around your children?
The thing that keeps me awake at night is my middle child, the autistic one, who he's ill-equipped to deal with the world as it is today. And I wonder what his future holds, because he doesn't make good decisions. And I feel guilty as a parent. When you have an autistic child who's disabled like that, what did I do wrong? And what could I have done better, or could I have prepared him better? And my wife says, we did all we could. There's always that nagging, what could I have done different? And then to know that he faces such uncertainty for his future. He faced uncertainty if the world was great. He had an uncertain future.
Yes.
But with what's going on in America right now and the rest of the planet, I do worry about him on a daily basis.
Yeah.
The older one, interestingly, he's a very, very smart guy, and he's a very interesting guy. And I could see him in New York, and making a bunch of money driving an Aston Martin, and I can see him living in Costa Rica in the jungle too. So,
yeah,
because he loves nature. So he's more resilient. He'll figure it out. But my middle son, I don't know what to do with him.
Yeah. You've talked a lot about what you've seen, particularly in the States, and what had you relocate over to Costa Rica. I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about how has that transition gone? I know it can be a mixed bag for any expat, even in the best of circumstances. And I'm just curious if you could share with us, how has that transition gone? What are you pleased with about that transition, and what has been surprising or possibly negatively surprising for you? Just completely as a curiosity, because there are so many folks wondering, can I get out of the States, and what can I do?
Well, such a mixed bag. But let me say this first. I absolutely love Florida, and I love the Gulf. I love the Gulf Coast of Florida. It's hard to watch what has happened to the Gulf Coast. I was there when Naples was a small town, and now it's from Naples to Fort Myers is all concrete. I've watched the bay water and the Gulf degrade and have red tide nearly constantly now, and fish kills and dolphin kills and turtle kills. So it's been very hard to watch, and yet I was home a couple months ago in Florida and standing at the edge of the Gulf looking out, and I'm in love with that place.
Mm.
So, on the other hand, Costa Rica is a beautiful place to be. Living here and vacationing here is different. So vacations, no challenges. Living here is a little more challenging. I do love it here. I love the diversity. I love the plants. There's such a diversity of plants and animals here. I mean, while I was sitting here, a blue morpho butterfly flew right behind me, and I saw monkeys this morning while I was working out. So it's a fun place to be. On the other hand, when I walk the beach here, I mean, there's beaches here where you can be the only person on the beach as far as you can see. And it's like an unspoiled paradise until you look down at your feet and see all the plastic on the beach that's washed up from the tide. And when I first got here, I said, what is wrong with these people? They would walk down this beach and not just pick up all this garbage. They're in the tourism business, pick it up. And I realized that you can pick it up today and it'll be back with the next high tide tomorrow.
Right.
Because there's so much plastic. You just inundated the planet with so much plastic. I will tell you that I recently made the decision to eat vegetarian, complete plant-based diet. I had sworn off red meat many, many years ago for dietary concerns and for the planet. I know that cattle farming is the worst thing for the planet as far as I can tell. But I was recently at the fish market locally, and the amount of fish that was taken overnight and that's just one little fish market, huge tuna, a sailfish, which nobody really eats, but they killed one of those, several marlin, all kinds of sharks, even small sharks. And I looked at that and I just was struck how unsustainable this simple fishing method is, and to compare that to the long lines of different countries that are out there, hundreds of miles of long line, we're killing the ocean. Mm-hmm. And so that's, and I love the ocean. I'm a water boy, but to see the Gulf, now see this, and the plastic, and there's a sea turtle release place here that they raise the sea turtles and release them. But as soon as they swim out, they're faced with eating plastic floating around 100 yards offshore.
Yeah.
And so it's just, I don't know. I hate to be one of those people that's negative all the time, because I do live in a beautiful, beautiful place, but it's hard to look at something beautiful and realize that it may not be here much longer.
Yeah.
And I go to the sea turtle release, and there's 100 sea turtles making their way down the beach, and you want to clap and you want to cry at the same time. And so the last sea turtle release I went to last week, I was walking down the beach coming back from it, and there's a dead baby sea turtle washed up on the rocks. So it's just, it's a mixed bag of beauty and sorrow living here. More beauty than sorrow. I have to look at it that way.
Yeah.
So.
Again, if it's any help at all, I can tell you that you're not alone. It's remarkable how often the conversations that, like this one, get to a point of speaking about that which a person loves, because it seems like that's so important in these times of so little real connection between people. You know, I guess I'll just jump to what seems to be one of the toughest spots in this conversation across the board is that particularly in the States, we have a real weak suit of being able to connect with other people about things that truly matter to us. We have endless online opportunities to connect and like and social media and so on. But the closer the conversation gets to being face to face, and the closer it gets to sharing what we really love about life, about our family, about our neighborhood, about that the chances are most folks in the States have such a weak suit in connecting in an authentic way that what we end up with is a deeply polarized population, or at least a very lonely population. And I'm wondering if my sharing that sparks you to say anything.
Well, I think it's evident in the suicide rate in America that people are just not connecting, feeling left out.
Mm-hmm.
I think especially men, because we're acculturated not to talk about feelings and
Right.
what we love or not. And then there's such a divide politically in America. I mean, even my own family. So there's certain topics I just don't broach with certain family members because I'm shocked that they're as ill-informed as they are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of America's problems is that Americans, at least my observations, they don't struggle too much. You go from your air-conditioned car to your air-conditioned house to your air-conditioned office, and there's plenty of food on the table for most people.
Yep.
And so they don't feel the effect of climate change, and they're so isolated from their environment. They want to get in from the heat as quickly as they can, or in from the bugs as quickly as they can, and they've lost that natural affinity we have for nature. And so that I think it makes it easy to ignore it. And then if you're at the bottom of the socioeconomic status, you're struggling to make a living every day. You don't have time to care about this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to put food on the table and pay your light bill.
Yep.
And those of us that have the luxury of the time are so busy with social media or television or whatever that it's easier to be distracted by that than do the hard reading. I do have a social media. I have Facebook, and I notice if I post a picture of my dog, I'll get 150 likes. But if I post a meaningful article on climate change, not one person reads it or makes a comment on it. It's like it's too much work.
Yeah.
Scroll on and look at somebody else's cat. So what's been surprising for me here is I actually have a much greater social circle here than I ever had in the United States. And I had a social circle. Being a lawyer, you have an immediate social circle of other lawyers and judges, and I didn't find myself particularly close to any of them. But here, I didn't think I would have any friends, and yet I have a huge amount of friends here, and it's, I think, partly because people that move here kind of have the same mindset.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a special person to want to be in Costa Rica with the no air conditioning and the bugs and the hardship and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So you got to want it. And so we've found a community of like-minded individuals here, which is nice. to be able to socialize and talk with them about the things that bother you. So I'm in a unique position here as opposed to where I was in the United States, which I could talk to no one. Even my best friend he wasn't a Trump supporter, but he had no time to talk about climate change or the destruction of the ocean, or any of that. So he wasn't even educated in the least.
Yeah.
So I spent time with him having a good time and laughing a lot, but we never talked about anything serious because he had some crazy notions
Yeah.
about.
Well, I'm not a big fan of the word advice, particularly around the topics that you and I are talking about, because in my experience, these are all topics that are so huge, they're beyond anybody that I'm aware of, anybody's scope. You know, like nobody knows how to handle this one. Nobody's got the answers to this one. But what I'd like to ask of you, Matt, is, you know, what I've been able to in my now 3 interviews with you and your family members, I really get a sense that it's no accident that you got a daughter and her friend that I just interviewed, Kaeli and Dylan, yesterday. I was so deeply impressed by their passion and their clarity, their ability to articulate, you know, that I rarely hear that in adults, much less people their age. And it's extraordinary. And there are a number of pieces that you're sharing that many folks, particularly in the States, might one day dream of, but most, I forget how you just said it, you know, really just don't want to do the work, just don't really know. And there's a particular part of, I'm pretty sure the audience that will be watching this podcast series and this special interview series on parenting, people who aren't as far along the track as you are, and you and Susan are, and they don't know how to even start to figure out, if not the business as usual world as that we all have grown up in, if that's not the way to do it anymore, if it's not turning out well in that side of the conversation, then what? Then how do you generate an alternative? How do you come up with new ways of being with your children? How do you come up with new possibilities of where to live and how to live? And so I'm not asking you for advice, but I am asking to keep doing what you've been doing so well. This whole conversation, this whole interview is, could you share a little bit, imagining that some of these folks are sitting with us around a table and they're just wondering, how do I even get started? How do I start to get my mind around a different way of being with regard to job and where I'm living and how to raise kids, and what's the story about what's possible in the future for my kids? Is there anything you could share in that direction?
Yeah, I think that I think it takes a total reorganization of our priorities to adjust for the potential future that we face, or lack of future that we face. I'll be honest with you, I don't hold out great hope for the future. I don't think we escape this one. It's the tipping point. It's long come and gone.
Mm-hmm.
I think, to be able to save the planet. And so my advice would be, and it's hard for some people to believe this, because I grew up thinking if I have certain things, I'll then be happy. And I finally figured out it wasn't about the things that I own, but the experiences that I have and the time that I am present now in this moment, instead of worrying about what I'm going to get in the future. But I better be happy now.
Mm-hmm.
And in my car at home, right below the speedometer, I put a little sticker that says, "Be happy now."
Mm.
And so my advice would be to parents with children is, they don't want your presence with a T. They want your presence with a CE. They want you around. They want your influence. They want your limits. And to spend time with them and make moments, make experiences, take them places, let them see the world. And the antidote to racism is to travel, you know, and travel your children, and not be so worried about accumulating things, because things don't matter when it's all said and done. They don't matter. And so it would take a reorganization. And then with regard to the planet, we all have to be activists, every one of us. There's no more time for anybody to sit in the sidelines and go, well, the politicians will take care of it, or that group over there, or I'll send $50 to National Resources Defense Council. We all have to be involved. And we all have to do everything we can in our own backyard. Mm-hmm. So I don't buy anything in a plastic anything anymore. I don't eat meat anymore. I drive an electric car and have for years. I have solar panels on my roof. So I'm doing the things that I can. And if everybody does that, you teach the world to be a nicer place. You teach your children by example to not think about themselves, but to think about the future and other people on the planet. And it's probably the best gift you could give your kids, is to have them grow up with some sense of empathy towards other people and other animals on the planet.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've succeeded in that, but
maybe. Yeah. Well, Matt, I just want to acknowledge you and Susan, and only had the pleasure of meeting Kaeli in terms of your children. But I just want to acknowledge the consistent heart and intent and clarity, and particularly because I've spoken with Susan quite often on this kind of interview or online. There's just a particular way, what's the word I'm looking for? It's kind of a mischievous, almost fun quality that she can get into in some of the conversations. And I think it showed up in Kaeli a little bit as well in just a couple of the answers. And I don't know that it gets a whole lot better than that. You know, having had plenty of these impossible conversations now, I don't know how much better it's going to get, because I tend to agree with you. We've passed the off ramps that would have made something sustainable or something fixable. And so between here and whatever the future brings, I tend to end up in a camp very similar to the one you were just describing. That there's something really important about the quality of our presence with one another. That was the CE presence that you were talking about. So I just really appreciate your taking the time to share. I think you have some experience and some perspective that most of us don't get a chance to have. Very, very valuable experience, both in the States and now in Costa Rica. And I just thank you and Susan for including yourselves and Kaeli in this series. And I just wish you well in creating that next chapter of life in Costa Rica, and it sounds like in Florida as well. Thank you so much for taking part in this.
I've really enjoyed it. But I must say about my wife, she is My wife is the smartest person I have ever met.
Hmm.
She really is a genius. And if it was not for her, I would have probably been on the career path of lawyering and acquiring and what I thought I was supposed to do, what we're told in America, acculturated to do. And it's her that opened my consciousness about this issue. And so I got to give her a lot of credit. She's the impetus behind us being here. And I wanted to move here because I like to surf, but years ago, she's the one that said we need to take advantage of an opportunity to give our child this chance now, and so I want to thank you for allowing us to participate. I appreciate, I honor what you're doing. It's really commendable. Everybody has to contribute how they can. I'm trying to raise trees to reforest.
Yeah.
But everybody has their talent, and I appreciate your talent. So I appreciate you doing this.
Great. Well, Matt, once again, thank you. And I look forward to the next opportunity, whenever that can be, to speak with you, with Susan, with Kaeli, and possibly Dylan, and gosh, maybe the whole community next time.
Very good. Well, you got to come visit.
I would love to. You don't have to ask twice. I will relay that very, very generous invitation to my partner Heather, and we'll give it serious consideration.
It's a beautiful place here where we live, so you got to come.
Matt, thank you so much for your time.
All right, take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Also available on our website, www.livingresilience.net, is a wide array of articles, online learning series, arranging group and individual resilience coaching, and sign up for our every other Tuesday free support group that we call Safe Circle Calls.